Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight to this talk with Jason Larkin. If I can ask you please to switch your mobile phones to silent, that would be appreciated. And when we get to the Q&A, if you can talk into the microphone for the benefit of our online audience, that would be great. After the event, we've got some copies of Jason Larkin's Cairo Divided paper that will be available on the bar afterwards. And then I'd just like to introduce our moderator tonight. It's Max Horton, who's the course leader of the MA in Photojournalism at Westminster University. And she's also co-editor of 8 magazine. I'll hand over to her for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having us here. I should just explain how it is that I'm the lucky person that gets to speak with Jason this evening. I first met Jason in 2007 when I was a visiting lecturer just doing a module called Writing Photography. Actually, it was called Writing for Photojournalists then, I think, slightly clumsy title that I soon changed. And Jason seemed an unusually accomplished student in relation, very committed to the writing module. And he showed, a real engagement with wanting to get that part of it right as well. I didn't even look at people's photographs at that time. And then later I got involved with major project marking. And Jason had been to India and had done a really unusual story on the middle class in India. You know, a lot of students want to go to India, want to work maybe with tribes or do that kind of work. Jason had photographed the kind of burgeoning middle class. And it was really quite a very fresh approach, very positive, very modern, very good photographs, which isn't always the case at universities, no offence to current students. So he was already working kind of beyond the remit really of the MA. And so after he left, I kept seeing his name crop up here and there. There was the odd article in the FT, in the Guardian. And then he sent something to Photo 8 on the Aral Sea, and it was a very sort of complex project. It was an environmental project. And he'd paired up with a writer, I noticed, a guy called Jack Shenker. And I think we did something with Photo 8, didn't we? I think we did. And there's more news on what's happened with the Aral Sea project. But again, it was a very committed piece of self-generated journalism, which was quite surprising for these two young guys who were sort of going out there in the world and just making this really excellent piece of work that could be published anywhere. Now, whether or not it would get published is another matter that we'll go on to talk about this evening, and you know how difficult it can be to get sort of the long-form journalism, whether that's photographic journalism or the written word journalism, published. So the next time I came across Jason was I was curating a photo exhibition in Brighton, and there was suddenly this beautiful set of images which we're not going to see this evening, so you have to look them up on Jason's website, called Past Perfect. It's a series on museums in Egypt and how a country kind of looks at its own past, or creates its own, well, future through its past, if you like. And in a very busy group exhibition, this work got a whole wall and special frames and special Faro and ball paint. It was a very, very strong body of work, which indeed has gone on to win the very coveted PDN award. Is it called anything more than that?
It's the Arnold Newman New Portraiture Award, but yeah.
Which was $15,000 prize and brought with it an exhibition in Maine. Is that right? Very recently. And most recently, I've just got back from Hereford Photo Festival, where yet again it was Jason who was chosen to be the commissioned artist for a body of work there. And then, of course, there's the reason that we're here tonight, which is to celebrate the publication of Cairo Divided, which copies will be available afterwards. It's a 32-page newspaper with a 6,000-word essay by Jack Shenker. And so I'd seen Jack's name crop up with Jason's work, and then suddenly it was the Egypt, the Arab uprising, the revolution, and Jack's name, as you may know, was absolutely all over the Guardian. He became, and is now, is that right?
Yeah.
The Cairo correspondent, the Egypt correspondent for the Guardian. And because Jack is not here this evening and is half of Cairo Divided, I'd just like Jason just to introduce Jack in his absence, if you will, please.
Me and Jack both moved to Egypt about the same time. Jack's 27 years old. And started life literally writing for The Guardian, moved to Cairo about 6 months after graduating. He did a work placement in The Guardian, and it's sort of, I guess he's sort of been backwards and forwards. He's now based between London and Cairo, but works predominantly just in Egypt for The Guardian, and has won numerous awards for especially the work he did during the uprising.
I happen to know that in a Guardian all-staff meeting that Alan Rusbridger singled his work out for the way The Guardian ought to cover such events, which is, yeah, very impressive. So Jason's just about to show you the work, the photographs from this project. I mean, perhaps you'd like to introduce it, Jason, but just to say, the point of it is that it's a long form essay. It's something that started a long time before the concept and the photographs, the uprising, and will continue, as Jack says in his essay, for a long time afterwards.
Cool. So before showing you any images, I thought I'd just give a brief outline to how the project developed. I've been living in Cairo for about a year and a half, and in early 2009, I started to hear much more about things going on the suburbs, on the outskirts of Cairo. And one of the big events that had happened was the AUC, which is the American University of Cairo, had just relocated. And I was hearing from PhD students and other visiting students about how horrid it was, and it was right out in the desert, and there were lots of jokes about how people would go to Cairo to study at the university in Cairo, but then be sent out to the desert. So I decided to go check out this area myself, and sure enough, I was completely struck by the amount of construction going on. The AUC sort of compound was the only thing finished, and all around it was just miles and miles of construction. And behind it was just endless desert, and I think the desert runs all the way through to the Suez, and this is on the eastern side of Cairo. So I was really struck and wanted to know more about what was going on, because there was very little talk going on in Egypt itself, in Cairo, about you see billboards around for advertising for compounds and things, for sort of new villas, but I didn't really understand the scale of it. And sure enough, people I was speaking to back in Cairo were all talking. Everybody seemed to have a connection somehow. You had people who knew people whose jobs were about to move out there. Their headquarters were, their company was building a new headquarters, and in 2 years they'd be moving out there. People who's worked for government ministries, and they planned to move out there in 2 years. So everybody seemed to have a connection, yet no one was really talking about it, and definitely not in the media. So yeah, I would then hire cars to go out, because there's no public transport at all, and go out and explore these spaces. And very early on, I realized that this was much bigger than the way it's sort of being advertised in billboards, and it seemed like there was a bit of an exit strategy taking shape. So yeah, that really was the sort of driving force behind me wanting to explore it further and try and capture it on film, and take photos of it. So yeah, I mean, the project ran throughout 2 years, and so these images are sort of from various points of that, and I'll talk a bit more about how I sort of collaborated with Jack Shenker, and yeah, so if we could drop the lights now. This is one of the first images I took, and it's a mobile phone mast. And it's sort of slightly a sort of beautification of technology, but this is a big plot of land that's earmarked. You might be able to make out some of the contours that's sort of been dug out, and there are posts. So one of the first things that goes in is a telephone mast, so that people can communicate. This is an image that's been shot quite close to where the AUC campus that I mentioned earlier, which was really one of the first major institutions to move out there and to sort of bring a bit more attention, and definitely actually bring not everyday people, but people through to this space. This is a shot taken on a crane, actually, across Palm Hills village. And everything you see, none of it's finished. Nobody's living there. And the project that we were given access to here, this development, is actually been frozen. And Jack talks a lot more about this in the essay, but it's something that's been really interesting since the revolution. There's been lots of legal cases about how this land has been sold and how legitimately it was sold. And it transpires a lot of it hasn't been legitimately sold. So until they work out either paying for the land properly to the state, projects like this have been frozen. So this is one of those. So there's two main areas that are being developed one on the east, which is New Cairo, which is this, and then one to the west, which is the 6th of October. And yeah, as the title suggests, it's as blatant as that. It's just New Cairo. And pretty much all the buildings you can see here, I think, are going to be for sort of business headquarters or ministries. Again, nothing finished. And
can I just say
yeah.
that this is one of my favourite images, and I think you were saying that it was part of the sort of surreal aspect of the landscapes in particular that just drew you to wanting to document it in the very first place. I mean, that incredible sort of citadel over there, and then these sort of iron, I mean, I don't really know what the basement of buildings generally look like, but are they going to withstand this desert?
I mean, there's definitely small towns within Egypt that had been built badly, you know, against advice of others, and then the dunes come in. The desert around Cairo. So Cairo, none of this land has ever been inhabited for like 14 centuries.
There's a reason for that, presumably.
There is, because it's just so inhospitable. You can't get water out there. You know, I mean, now they have the technology to get water, but for the whole time that Cairo's existed, no one's ever thought, why would we put water all the way out there? You know, most of it will get evaporated in the process of just taking it out there. I don't think the dunes will come in here. I mean, there is a picture later on that shows that sand is constantly sort of coming through, because sand's in the air, and you know, you get sandstorms every now and then, the khamsins. But yeah, it's more to do, I think, with the sort of ecological impact of, like, you know, water usage, you know, energy, like the amenities that have to be provided. And I think what this project is more concerned with is who's moving into it, who is this project, you know, this space built for, rather than, you know, if they needed an entirely new city for everybody, that's one thing. But this is a city that's being built for just an exclusive part of the society. And I think that's something that, you know, that both myself and Jack try to sort of tackle and understand. And I think that was the sort of driving force for me to go out there and explore this. It was just an exit strategy, but for just a few people. I think that's what I found alarming. Yeah. This image is on the front cover of the publication, and it hasn't been published anywhere else, but I really like it because it was an image that I took towards the end of the project, and I really did feel like I knew these areas very, very well. And you know, through sort of 12 months, 18 months, I was always finding new compounds, but I always felt like, you know, by the end of that, I thought I'd got to grips with the space. And literally this compound, I think there's 4 compounds in total, which will house about 4,000 families. And they're big villas. They are really nothing that you can see in downtown Cairo. Actually, I didn't really sort of explain Cairo, but Cairo's, maybe just, I plan to do that in the brief introduction, but Cairo is a city of 20 million people. It's got more inhabitants than Lebanon, Jordan, and Libya combined. Yeah, it's the largest city in the Middle East and Africa, and is supposed to be one of the densest populations in the world. So,
and downtown is where
downtown,
it's receiving massive humanity.
Yeah, but
I think,
because everything sort of exists through the Nile, so it's like north to south. Nothing really expands. It's not really a city that goes west to east. So these developments are all east and west of the city. But this is 20 minutes drive from the last development behind me, which is an hour from downtown Cairo. So, and these aren't holiday homes. There's no great views. There's nothing out here. It's absolute like isolation.
So they're kind of going to be gated communities where no one will be encouraged to really leave, presumably.
Completely. I mean, there's nothing really in them. I mean, you know, there's some of the bigger projects have like a big master plan where there are shops and there are other sort of amenities and things to do. But for the most part, it's a very much service culture. So it's kind of like, you know, we don't even have to think about that. You just sort of tell the shop, you know, to deliver it here. I don't know exactly how it works. No one knows. I mean, it's such a new sort of space, and I don't think it's been very well planned. So, but yeah, it kind of, I like this image with the juxtaposition of the desert in front, which they're still sort of digging up. You can see. I won't talk over all the images. I don't know if it's necessary.
Is that a name of one of the?
Yeah, it's just another plot that's been earmarked for development, and it's actually really not that big. It's probably just a bit higher than me. So I mean, I think I had to walk like a mile to get to it. So again, it was this sort of very strange sort of relationship like that. You know, no one would see that, and this kind of Hollywood type of sign. This is something that you'd know when another piece of land had been sort of marked for development. A huge, giant billboard like this would be erected, and then soon enough, a massive, I mean, I think that's about 100 meters long or so, will be put on it, you know, advertising a very sort of exclusive lifestyle that you can end up living if you move into this property. You know, so a lot of it's about dreams and aspirations. So the imagery that sort of goes on there is always quite startling. But
there's a fantastic quote from one of the sales representatives that's in Cairo Divided, the publication, about how it's not a gated community, but we make sure that only the right sort of people get in. Yeah, very, very telling remarks. And it's all a very kind of Western style, it seems to me. I mean, the names, like, did you say Palm something? Palm Village?
Palm Hills,
Palm Hills.
Utopia, Dreamland. Yeah, there's a very sort of Disney-fied appreciation towards the kind of the way that they've reappropriated like the Islamic side of things. So there's kind of like that can be very sort of plasticky and Disney, and then this sort of European, you know, it's kind of like Italian villas and sort of Italian gated compounds. And yeah, I mean, so little of it's actually been finished that, you know, I didn't really come across much of it, and I think that's something that it was visually very arresting, because actually when they're finished they're not that interesting, they're quite ugly. You see a couple of pictures where there's, you know, the villas are starting to look finished, but I found that sort of in-between position where something is happening, no one's entirely sure what, who's planned it, you know, who's going to live here, and that was what I found really exciting visually.
Well, that's become incredibly timely, because of course that's where Egypt itself is right now as well, in an interregnum.
Yeah,
so,
massive transition, yeah. This is the picture of the guy who's employed solely to just go around the streets and remove the sand that is blown in daily. And I think without him, you know...
He's already employed, even though there's
no yeah, no, totally.
Wow. It looks like a kind of, with quite a generous interpretation, that could look like a kind of conjuring trick, a kind of beast that's being conjured to keep away the sand. Certainly when I saw it the first time, it's a very powerful picture, I think. But I didn't realise that's what he was doing.
Yeah, a very thankless, endless task, I think.
Yeah. His other name is Sisyphus. He's a rock star, isn't he?
Yeah, he's one of the Middle East, well, he's definitely one of the biggest Egyptian pop stars, Amra Diab.
How big is that?
It's huge. I'd say it's like 40, 50 feet tall. It's a ring road that out onto the left there's a bunch of compounds. But everything's so badly planned. So this road, it was so frustrating to get to the compounds on the other side, because you'd have to drive 5 miles up because no routes off had been developed. You know, it's really, really badly planned out. But yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, you would never have seen adverts like this out here, because it would have just been industrial spaces or where, you know, this truck with a... But now, as all these new sort of compounds are coming in and people are starting to go out to these areas to look at new houses, then you start seeing the advertising popping up. A lot of the stuff that I was seeing, and you know, I only got permission to go into a couple of these spaces, all very ad hoc, all very sort of thrown together. There didn't seem like any plan anywhere in how to construct these new spaces in these new areas. But a lot of it as well just looked like it being deserted. It transpires that in 2009, or maybe a bit earlier, 2008, 2009, the government had levied a tax. So if you put foundations down there and then, you got the building tax, you wouldn't be taxed for, you know, if you were to then sell it on. And so what you had is this huge rush, and I think that was another problem with why it felt so disorganized, because people just ran in there, buying plots of land very cheaply, you know, through the NDP, through Mubarak's kind of connections, and this like nepotistic sort of network that kind of exists in Egypt. And so you were, yeah, this big rush, and therefore you'd find properties like this that I just never saw anybody in the sort of 8 months that I'd be hanging around.
Yeah, there's a whole feeling of desertion in the project generally.
Yeah, this is a self-explanatory picture, but it's interesting. This was about one of the only times where when Jack had been interviewing, I mean, we would go along to interviews together, and we would get taken around to a couple of these big developments where they would try and show off, you know, what they were doing and their new vision. But here they actually admitted that the golf course was a mistake, and you know, it's 6 months to a year before it's going to open, and it's already dying, and they're struggling to keep it going, and the palm trees are, you know, kind of withering away. So that was interesting. But I think there were 3 other golf courses that had all been planned.
With big name kind of associations.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's all very much quite sort of golf inspired, as in the Gulf region, the kind of projects and the way that things have been done there, you know, buying names and then just putting it on the top. I don't know how much those people are actually involved, but it's all about association with PR and advertising. Very much, yeah. This is something that started to happen towards the end of the project, is start to see more and more security guards. And after talking to a few, it transpires that because there's so little presence, especially at night time out there, you know, some workers live in the buildings, but the majority will go back to Cairo, you know, and the engineers and all that, they'll all leave. And so people were going in and cutting down lampposts, you know, taking out cabling, taking out piping, you know, and stealing building materials. So
and putting it in another compound up the road or something.
Yeah, quite possibly, or just selling it on. We didn't actually really follow that route. No. It wasn't something that, but so all of a sudden you start to see these lone security guards hanging out in an absolutely like empty area, and they'd be there all night.
Did the street lamps work?
Hardly any of them did, yeah.
They're starting to look like some of the images I've seen of fake war zones. You know, the Anne Miley or even Broomberg and Channerin type, they just look like fake places that aren't meant for habitation.
So props that have been very rushed and you know, built very quickly, I like this image because of the sort of the wooden ladder, you know. I mean, I think the way I was going to talk about this a bit later, but a lot of the workers, they're employed and they don't get given tools. It's just like, you know, here's your lot, you know, here's a site to work on, and just go for it. And so it's you know, and you'd see kids in there, and very informal, very sort of thrown together. You know, you don't see building projects. I mean, there are different parts of the world where you do, you know, Pakistan, I'm sure, and China, but throughout the Middle East, for the most part, everything's pretty organised now. So Egypt seems to have a very sort of rough around the edges feel to it.
Because families come, don't they, and bring their children and help. They work together. Have you got a picture of it?
Yeah, I think it's just next. Yeah, because they get paid. So this is a family, Ahmed and his brother, and Ahmed's son to the left, and they get paid per square foot. So that's why they then just bring in more family members. So rather than being paid per day, you know, per person, if they can get more and more family members in, and especially if they're close family because they all live together, so it's sort of like that money would be shared, it wouldn't need to be split up. And I don't know if they pay their sons. We never asked a kid, I don't think they do. But so that was an interesting dynamic, and you know, he was quite lucky because he had his own car, so it was something he was like, I can get in and out, but it would take him 2 hours to get there and 2 hours back.
And what do these guys think of these compounds?
I think there was a appreciation.
Not to generalise too much, obviously.
Yeah. I think there was an appreciation that Egypt was moving forward. You know, things are happening. There's development, and there was jobs, and that was something. You know, a lot of these people are coming up from Said, which is like Upper Egypt, or coming from sort of oasis areas, Fayoum. So you know, that's great. But I think they, for the most part, and Jack definitely has a few quotes where they realise that there will never be allowed back in here. Once they finish these spaces, they'll be, you know, locked out, and people like them won't see the insides of the houses they've built, won't be allowed to walk on the sort of parks and these kind of public spaces that are apparently being built. And I think they found that frustrating. But I think, you know, this was before the revolution, so the way that people would talk were very much like, this is our fate kind of thing. Whereas now I think the sentiment and the way that people are feeling about what can happen in the future is very, very different. So I think back then, you know, it did feel like everything was stagnant. Like, you know, there was no other choice. It was like, this is our lot. You can see kind of the scale. I think that billboard at the back there is probably, you know, a good sort of mile away. You still see how, I think it's 4 stories high. And so, yeah.
Do you have a picture of a mosque in this?
Yeah. So this is another family, and yeah, so this is quite similar to the picture with the palm tree. When an area is being earmarked for development, I think a lot of the people that will invest are sort of, I don't know exactly how it works, but I think they put the money in to build a mosque, and you can see the sort of dumper trucks and the other workers' trucks, so it's for workers in the surrounding area to come in and pray. There's another security guard.
It looks such a lonely job. And how could you actually be effective if people wanted to really go in?
And it's pitch black as well.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's unbelievably pitch black. So.
But he gets quite well paid, does he?
No. I wouldn't be. I don't think he'd be paid more than £20 a month. I mean, that's kind of the average wage.
Another very dramatic, almost war zone type image.
Yeah, it's interesting out in the outskirts of Cairo. In Cairo, it's every day is just sun, sun, sun. You rarely see clouds. It rains 3 times a year, and as soon as you get out, I mean, we're talking, you know, we're like 40 kilometers outside. You start to see different cloud formations, and it looks like it could, you know, rain, and it doesn't actually rain, but it only really rains along the coast. But yeah. This is a development a bit closer to Cairo. You can actually see Cairo in the corner there on the right, and that's actually low-cost housing. That's not part. That's an old 70s project. But this circle in front is a grass helipad, and so you start to get the impression, because there's so little grass in Egypt. So that's in Cairo. So that's something that stands out quite quickly, quite early on. Again, they're struggling to keep it going. But there's even less helicopters. So it's all about this sort of affluence and this sort of perceived way that the people who are going to buy these properties, or who would like to buy, and you know, people eventually move in, will be flying in their helicopter to live here. So this, yeah, it's very strange, very strange. It's all so much marketing, and you know, Jack goes into it much more in the essay about, you know, sort of literally museums to kind of Western goods in the showroom, where you have cabinets filled with different products.
Yeah.
That it's like, this is, you can aspire to, you know, to get this kind of, these goods behind you.
like this image. The random, it just makes it look like people have just randomly climbed up it. They are actually in the process of
yeah, I think they're still just putting it together. Yeah,
right.
it's still, yeah, they're just putting metal struts across it.
And to me, it just really shows the chaotic approach to piecing all of this together.
I think also it shows you sort of like this, you know, there's only 4 guys there. I mean, it probably took them months to put that up, whereas it's just a billboard. I mean, it's not even part of the project. So it's just, again, I mean, I've never really been in a space like it. I've never seen, nothing made sense. Everywhere you went, you're sort of bewildered by, you know, what were people actually doing.
And the language, although it's about exclusivity, it's all about including people, but only the right people, only the rich people.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, this is villas that are pretty much complete. The road in front still looks a mess, but just to give you a sort of rough idea, I think these villas were ranging between $700,000 and $1.4 million, depending on what kind of setup you got and whether you got a pool on the top or something like that. And yeah, I mean, 44% of Egyptians are on less than $2 a day. So, I mean, these villas before were just kind of unheard of. There's a couple of spaces within downtown Cairo where the rich have lived, and there are some nice villas, but you know, it's staggering to think that this amount of people could move into this space and actually afford these new houses. So yeah, I mean, when you get to like millions of dollars and people are earning still $20 a month, it's £20 a month, sorry, it was hard to sort of drive between downtown Cairo, and because I lived right downtown, and
But it's very strange that, I mean, the government were behind a lot of these developments. The Mubarak's government were behind a lot of these developments.
They were behind. They're behind the drive of actually. I mean, the whole sort of both Nasser and Sadat, previous presidents, were very much into kind of trying to reclaim and sort of build and land. You know, everything's always existed within the Nile Valley and then the Delta. When you know, Cairo splits the Nile, and then it sort of splits off, and so life has always been very constrained to these. And there's, you know, Toshka's another project which is very ambitious, which was set up by NASA and is still ongoing, and no one knows how long it's going to take. So yeah, it's sort of like greening the desert, taming wild, you know, the sort of the wilderness to, you know, make sort of new societies. And there's we did a big project in the around the desert the desert oases, and there they've been trying to bring new sort of graduates and farmers, and they'd give them free land, free electricity for 3 years. So because the Nile Valley is just so overcrowded, there's 80 million people live on this like tiny stretch of land in the Delta. So it's definitely something that's continued on from those periods.
I see.
And the land's been there for a while, and you know, there was the first development was in '97, Katamar Heights. And it was actually, people were relocated there from an earthquake that happened in, I think, 92, 93. And everybody thought they were mad. You know, some investors took some money out there. And now it's the most exclusive of the compounds. It's, you know, it's got a golf course and stuff. So there does seem to be something in the psyche of just like, no, let's, you know, progress. This is, but the idea that this is for the greater good of Egypt, this is for all Egyptians, this is about us as, you know, people moving forward, is smoke and mirrors, really. And I think when you get into it, you realise this is all very exclusive. This is very gated, and yeah, it's isolated exclusivity. Sorry.
But the likelihood is that even if they didn't get finished, which seems utterly impossible, that there would never be enough people who could afford to live there. However, you know, exclusive and wonderful it all is, it just seems like that would be impossible in a country where the economy, you know, can't be doing too wonderfully in many ways.
This all starts to feed into the sort of neoliberal reforms that happened in the 90s that the IMF were very like with and have sort of they've held Egypt up as a sort of poster boy. And I think a lot of people are still surprised that there is enough people to buy these villas, and apparently there is. I mean,
Really?
the demand, you know, I mean,
Wow.
some of these companies, they don't show their accounts, but, you know, some of them $80 million down on deposits before,
Really?
you know, they've even dug the land.
that's
You know, it's like,
fascinating.
no,
Okay.
so there really is like a lot of money behind this. You know, you've got Lebanese money, Gulf money, and the government did own some of the developments, but they have now since sold them on. But Talat Mustafa and some other developers, you know, huge money. So. Probably overrunning our time. But. Some sort of very basic viewpoint of, you know, if it all transpires that the land has been sold off at completely like knockdown prices to Mubarak's old party cronies, you know, the state would have just lost out on millions and millions of pounds worth of, you know, the actual cost of this land, and that's one. That's you know, that's very sad. It's very sad for Egypt to have missed out on all that money, and so hopefully these cases will go back through the courts, and either they'll pay the true value of this land, or they'll you know, freeze the building, and then. But if this money doesn't come through properly, I mean, all of this is paid for by the state. So this is like there's a huge water plant down the road that's about to be constructed, which will cost, you know, tens of millions of pounds. All this infrastructure, all these amenities, all are paid for by the state. So it's kind of this, you know, the everyday, you know, taxpayer is somehow contributing to what is being developed for a very small part of society.
And they could have benefited from it, but it wasn't sold off properly.
In theory, maybe it could have just paid for all of this itself. I mean, you know, no one really knows what's happening with this, you know, and the body that was set up to deal with all of this, the former chair of has gone to prison, and 2 former housing ministers have gone to prison since the revolution. So. I think it's a good one. These are all private villas, so this isn't gated, but these will be owned by businessmen. And what they tend to do is build a floor for each son or daughter. That's when we interviewed the workers and some people back in Cairo whose families were involved. So as soon as they're married, they'll then get a floor. I mean, you know, I think some of these properties people might not move into for like another 5 years. You know, like I said, until they're married. So it's it's going to be really interesting to go back and see how this place develops.
Yeah.
And that's the last image.
Oh, thank you very much. It's great to see them on screen. It's even perhaps more interesting to see them in the publication, and that's what's so great about the marriage of text and image. So we can go back to these pictures and reflect on them after having read 6,000 words, which is quite a big ask, I think is the phrase people use these days. But when we were talking about this, we were talking really about the long form feature and how important that is, which is partly to do with obviously why you've made this publication. But so I just wanted to start at the beginning, really. So when you were making these photographs, did you know what you were going to do with them? Did you have a publication in mind?
No, I tend not to actually. For most of the projects I do, when it's purely personal, I don't really tell editors that I'm doing it. You know, there's lots of different ways that I work, and the collaboration with Jack Shenker, you know, sometimes we're coming up with ideas and pitching them straight away, and we know exactly where they're going to go, and we know, you know, what kind of work they're going to be interested in, how long the text is going to be. But for things like this, we just keep it really, really open. I didn't actually mention, I was supposed to mention that, you know, Jack didn't get involved until about a year into me taking photos.
I think you said you had to make about 50 visits or something.
Yeah, I
he
mean,
made about 5.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously does other things as well. He'd
Sure.
go and interview ministers in Cairo and do research, and, you know, within the essay he talks to mental health experts about, you know, the splitting up of societies and kind of, you know, what's needed to make, you know, a big urban space work. So there's lots of areas that I didn't necessarily have to visit, you know, I didn't have to go along with him, but we were always talking about which direction, you know, and what he was thinking of going to, and there's this conference, you know, about sort of property developers, you know, sort of exhibiting their new homes, and he would go along and get some colour for that, from that side of things. But yeah, I just try and just shoot exactly what I think is interesting and what I think is I guess I'm trying to answer my own questions in my head by visiting these spaces, by trying to understand what I'm looking at. So I just explore and, you know, and sort of move in my own direction because of that. It's not until towards the end where Jack's, you know, is like, I think this is going to be 5,000 or 6,000 words, and I'm like, great, you know, I've got tons of images, and it, you know, it took a couple of months. We had this big PDF at the end of it, and we sent that out. And we only sent it to a few people that would actually be able to publish 5,000 or 6,000 words.
And who were they?
It was like, you know, we went straight to the top. We went National Geographic, we went, you know, New Yorker, Harper's, different journals. Yeah. And we had some, you know, sort of National Geographic sunk their teeth into it for a while, and they had it for quite a few months, where they were sort of talking about it, and it was going through all the different processes and all the different channels. There's lots of layers of command at National Geographic. It's a huge enterprise, and yeah, but it got sort of shot down at the last hurdle.
How disappointing was that?
It was that they wanted to change it. They never just buy a story and say, here we go.
But don't they pretty much always commission, in fact?
So they would have seen this as a foundation, and then they wanted to change it into a different. So I wasn't too.
So did you refuse?
Oh no, I wouldn't have refused. I don't think I would have gone that far. But it was one of these things where in the end you're like, okay, well, it wasn't meant to be. Yeah. I'm sure there's a life for it somewhere else. Yeah. So on we go, and Jack's like, okay, we're definitely gonna have to cut this down because no one's taking it.
Words or pictures or both?
No, sorry, the text. Yeah. Yeah. He'd definitely have to condense it for that. For the pictures, you know, picture editors, they like to see 30, 40. Yeah. You know, they can see even more. I mean, they'll always craft it the way they want with pictures, but I think with text, it's definitely a bit more about like how the writer envisions it, and I mean editors come in and cut words as well. But so then it, so that actually was before the revolution. You know, that was happening late last year, and then the revolution happened. Jack got very busy, and I was doing other things, and so obviously just not sure where, you know, what was going to happen there in the situation there. So, and it. You know, it definitely did affect the tone of the original writing. So Jack had to sort of go back, and he went back because he was going back. The revolution,
did you mean?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So it was rewritten. But so even Jack was writing without an audience in mind.
Yeah. No, he's got, you know, ambition. He wants to, and he has been doing very successfully, kind of long form essays. So that's something he's very interested in, and. Yeah, so it's kind of, I guess it's that thing. It's just like, this is what we really want to do. Let's just do it. Yeah.
So more than just, you'd already just done it, and so you decided to actually publish it yourselves, basically, when it didn't get published.
Well, no, and then it did get. So the Guardian published it in June, and International in Italy. No, it wasn't. It was in the magazine. Yeah.
How
it was
many pages?
I think it was 8 pages.
So how many images?
The images was quite good. They did sort of like a funny thing and lots of small bits. Not funny, it was nice, but they kind of put images that I feel like should be really big, quite small, and images that are quite, you know, so that was definitely another drive behind doing this publication. Yeah. So basically that happened, it was great, you know, sort of recoup some costs from doing it all, and yeah, it's always a really nice feeling. I think it's important to get the work out there. You know, maybe I'm naive not to think whilst I'm shooting where it's going to go and how I'm going to sell it and how am I going to make money from it. But
it's not naive if it works. even if it's in the end.
Yeah.
I guess it's more a matter of patience, perhaps, than naivety.
Yeah, yeah. You couldn't rely on it. You basically can't rely on paying the rent through projects like this, I think, sometimes.
And so were you working to pay the rent?
Yeah. Always taking commissions. Yeah, I mean, like when you say I shot this throughout 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I
you
was
were doing loads
in the
of other
States.
stuff.
I was down in South Africa. I was, all over the place. So I would make trips back.
And your bread and butter work, if you like, were you getting paid to do articles, or was it other forms of photography? Because I know you were published in Monocle and the FT and this and that and this and that. But is that how you made your money, or was it through commercial work
predominantly.
as well?
Yeah.
And of course, you won the competition for that.
Yeah. That's sort of this year has been a sort of grants and commissions for like festivals and things, which have been quite exciting.
Yeah, very. And we might talk about that more in a bit. But just back to the publication. So you made this decision, right? We're going to make a something. So did you think about making a book, for example?
No. So after it'd been published, I realised that Jack's essay was excellent, and I really thought that the two combined could be in the sort of unabridged version, because The Guardian's 2,500 words. I think International run 3,500 words. And so I think the real drive behind putting the publication together was to see the images big, and that's more the sort of format of the newspaper rather than a book. I mean, a book, the whole lead-up time is huge, and you have to get somebody interested in it really to do a book. I think you have to really have people behind. People are self-publishing and spending £2,000 or £3,000, but I don't want to do that. And also, I think the work doesn't merit a book format. I think the work is very much a part of a conversation that of what's going on in Egypt at the moment. It's a part of a discussion. It's not, I don't know, it's not Batinsky, it's not like this is energy, this is what's going on in the world with it doesn't have that sort of grandiose. So I think the newspaper print just really fitted for that format. It's something that is part of the conversation now. Hopefully it can engage an audience and for people to understand the situation a little bit better. But yeah, and also with books, there's so few photo books where you can get the 6,000 word essay running alongside it. They're always quite separate. I haven't really seen, I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but so I think that design side of things, it doesn't feel so alien, it doesn't feel too sort of disjointed if you have the text running side by side, because you're really used to that in that kind of format. Yeah,
I mean, God, that throws up loads of thoughts and questions, but not least the one where isn't it a shame that newspapers don't work with text and image together? Yes, we're used to the format of lots of pictures and lots of text in a newspaper, but if the pictures aren't necessarily working with the text, and I think that picture editors could, obviously it's not just down to them, it's a massive decision on which picture will go with articles, because pictures like this could accompany some articles rather than the obvious picture, say a piece on the environment in Cairo in the desert or whatever, but it doesn't tend to kind of happen like that. But to get back to the publication, so you decided to make this newspaper. Did you get a designer on board, I think, didn't you?
I mean, I sort of first went to Panos, my agency, because I guess for me it seemed very concrete and great idea, but it's always hard when you're just kind of floating around with things. So I went to Panos and they were great. They were like, totally. And one of the first questions I think Harry had was, is it going to be free? And I was like, definitely. And that's the great thing with.
So you never ever thought anything other than. So why?
I mean.
Why don't you think people would want to pay for this very interesting, very well produced piece of work by an award-winning photographer and an award-winning journalist?
That kind of makes me feel weird, but it's just I mean, this is kind of weird, just like people paying to come in and see this. So I don't know, I'm just sort of like finding my feet. I'm just sort of walking through things. Maybe putting a couple of pounds on, but you then get into another world of like trying to work out how you're going to do that and what who's going to take it and how much cut are they going to get. I just thought, I won this money. I'll put some of it into something that it works on various levels as well. It is a kind of publicity tool as well. It's a great business cards. I've got 5,000 copies of it. So there's other things that you go, okay, there's but I think for the most part, I have a slightly naive view that Okay, the big reason why I wanted to get it published for this month was because originally the elections in Egypt, the parliamentary elections, were supposed to happen in the middle of November, and I wasn't there in Egypt during the revolution. Frustratingly, I was in America, but I found it really interesting to sort of take in what was going on in Egypt through both American media and my normal media channels, and you know, I'm not massively involved, but I still know the people. I follow blogs, I follow Twitter feeds, and I was amazed at how little I really understood of what was going on, like how little in-depth kind of analysis there was sometimes of situations. You know, the news can only go so far. It's about facts and figures each day, and I sort of felt frustrated by that. And I think part of the drive to put this together and keep it exactly how it is in some small way that hopefully people who read this essay, and you know, not the images so much, but probably more to do with the essay, will have a better insight and understanding of Cairo, of Egypt's situation. It's, you know, it doesn't go into all the political problems at the moment and all the parties that are forming, and you know, it's a hugely complicated situation, especially now because the elections have been pushed back and they've been extended throughout 3 months, and the presidential elections have been moved to 2013, and very, very convoluted.
And most of the media's got a bit bored with Egypt now.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, maybe on the 28th there will be.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know, we'll see. Yeah. But I thought it would be interesting to put this out at the same time that the elections were supposedly taking place over 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And just allow kind of some people to kind of engage with what's going on there in a different, you know, because a lot of magazines and newspapers, they do tend to follow each other on the story. You know, if there's the first, you know, the sort of female political groups that have started up, that everybody's into, you know, I mean, it is news and it's interesting news, but there are other things going on, and I think that are just like part of the conversation.
I think when you said that it will mainly be the essay that people remember and helps them understand, I think perhaps what the pictures do, and perhaps we might talk about this in the questions later, but there'll be a reminder, there'll be the bit that's actually in the memory as like a door or a gateway to remembering why, you know, all the context of all this. So I think that they will be remembered. I think it's a really symbiotic relationship and a successful one. So the distribution, who do you want to read it? Who's it for? So once you didn't take the pictures for anyone, and Jack didn't write it for anyone, but when you decided to make this thing, who do you want to read it now?
I mean, when I say I didn't want to make it for anybody in particular, I mean, I always want an audience. Like, I think I have an editorial head on me, although I'm starting to be exhibited. I'm not thinking about, you know, purely art spaces in terms of like white walls, and I want this print to be sold for this amount. And I think, you know, I do think I'm always thinking about a sort of editorial audience. So just to be a bit clear about that. But oh, sorry, what was it?
So who's it for? Who do you want to distribute it to?
So and that was the other thing that got me excited about it being free and about it being, you know, produced on such a large scale, because as soon as you do a newspaper print, the first thousands, what's the expense? And from there on, it's really peanuts for each copy afterwards. So you can, you know, you could have printed 10,000 at not much more of a cost for the 5,000. And therefore it meant that I could just go to universities, cultural centres, you know, language institutions, think tanks, people who are starting to become engaged in the Middle East, people, you know, sort of young students, people who are, you know, just sort of feeling their way through kind of, you know, Egypt, whatever. I mean, if people are engaging with the Middle East and they're sort of looking at the language, then why not? Why would they not? You know, and that was the big reason again for translating the essay, Jack's essay, into
That's a good point that we haven't mentioned so far. When you see the publication, it is in English and in Arabic. And that was that relatively easy to do? I know you said that you both know kind of the best translator in town.
Yeah, luckily, there's a sort of friend of ours who set up a translation company. And that was probably one of the most expensive parts of it, 6,000 words. Jack's quite flowery, so sort of lots of, you know, I think they worked very, very hard for about a week to do that. And then massive problems with the design and the designer, and InDesign doesn't work, you have to get a Middle East version and all this kind of stuff. So
that you wouldn't think of.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, the designer hated me. But I think, I mean, everybody worked for free, apart from the translators and getting the printing done. So without that, you know, if everybody, the first art director I went to, You know, it was like, I've reduced my rate by half. It was amazing, amazing art that I would have loved, but I just straight away was like, you know, the figure he gave me. So
I just think it's a shame that people producing this excellent work, and this is what, you know, when I spoke to Kadir von Luisen about his Pan Am project and Rob Hornstra, who are working, I think, in similar ways to you, which is why I mention it on very self-generated projects, but they do something very different, which is crowdfunding, which I'll talk about in a minute. But, you know, they're both saying, yeah, don't make any money out of it. And I just think, well, you know, anybody else who's doing their job to the absolute best in their profession gets paid. You know, the doctor gets paid, the policeman gets paid, these people get paid, politicians get paid, and it just seems a shame, and we haven't found the answer yet, any of us, to that. And I'm not saying that to continue to do it. I mean, it's obviously better to do it than to not do it, but it kind of doesn't make it right that you don't get paid. And it's lucky that, you know, you're all three. I was going to say young. I think it's fair to say that Kadir isn't young, but you haven't chosen at whatever stage in your lives a kind of other responsibilities, and you know, of houses and children and those things. So it's a specific type of person that's able to make this work, and that also, this isn't your fault at all, but it makes it restrictive for other people who do have those responsibilities to make it. So it's just a problem for the industry. I
think photojournalism is definitely, though, an industry where you have to work out what you do and don't want in life. Just the nature of it, you know, just going off and getting on planes and, you know, whatever. So I think that, but yeah, you're completely right. I mean, everybody talks about the death of photojournalism and all this kind of conversation I find entirely boring. I think there's amazing, amazing work going on, and it's never been a better time. I feel really privileged to be involved in this industry and see the things I do. I don't know how sustainable it is. You know, that is something that's, and it's a slightly different question, but it's part of it, because it's sort of like, you know, how do you end up funding it? How do you end up, you know, surviving? Do you just sleep on people's, you know, sofas or inflatable mattress and kind of, as in my situation at the moment in London, you know, so it's really, it can really, that's the way up, and I think that's something that's a bit different.
And what the two guys I just mentioned do are crowdfunding, so they get their audience to start paying for their works in advance. You know, I won't go into detail, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, with these bigger names, I think they might get to a point as well where they just actually don't want to do the day-to-day news, and I, in a way, aren't that, you know, I'm not that interested in, you know, doing newspaper, following, you know, politicians and handshakes and whatnot. So there is a bit of a sort of choice that I've made as well. This is the kind of work that I want to do, but, you know, 3 months without a job, you start to rethink that. But yeah.
I think it's time. Reluctantly, I'm looking at all my questions and thinking, to hand over to you, which I'm sure you'll have very interesting questions as well. So yeah, let's do that. Got one in the front row. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mona Dili. I run an image library called the Zenith Image Library, and we specialize in Middle East, but not as you know it. It's basically non-news-led, non-current affairs-led photography that focuses on documenting the region in the ways you haven't seen it. It's kind of the three-dimensional Middle East. So I was very interested to come to this talk, because that seems to be the genre of photography that you've been doing, and I'm very interested in the idea of self-generated journalism, because the image library is there in a way in its own right to document the region, but also it's actually to encourage editors to engage with the region differently than they have done so far, and commission articles, perhaps photo-led, but after looking at the image library saying, hey, there's a big music scene, there's a big film scene, look at this street scene in Cairo, look at, you know, and then have new ideas that aren't coming from the news gathering room. Can you tell me a bit about your experience of how much of that there is and isn't or could develop?
I definitely found it frustrating, and I think, you know, the journalists that I hung out with and the other photographers in Cairo, I mean, sometimes it'd be as blatant as, Jack, we've seen this article here, like, can you just go cover it? And Jack would be like, just copy and paste it, you know, and it is a big struggle to sort of turn around and be like, and I mean, that was, that was the great thing about being in a collaboration. It's like, oh, I've got this idea. What do you think, Jack? You know, it's like, you're like, well, actually, I don't think that's really going to go anywhere, or I've seen it somewhere else, or, you know, so it's backwards and forwards. And between him and his contacts, you know, me and my contacts and my ideas and his ideas, we would get together, and so we were just constantly pitching. I mean, we'd always have 3 or 4 story ideas on the go that were out making the rounds to other, you know, publications. And it's hard. It's definitely hard to do. You know, before the revolution, no one cared about Egypt. I mean, you know, I hardly made any money, and so yeah, I don't know really what to say. It's just it's the system. What was that book? Was it Flat World? Or Flat Planet? Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, you know, it's definitely there. It's definitely sort of experienced it. Journalism as well. You know, it's just so I don't really know. You know, I've built relationships with certain editors, and I give them story ideas, but in the end it goes to their editor, you know, it goes to the magazine editor. And
you were saying that Jack you're almost envious of Jack's relationship with words editors, because they will actually give feedback, and picture editors just tend to go no.
I'll stop that now. I don't know if there's any picture editors in there.
They can defend themselves.
No, I mean, it's one of these things, I think, with, you know, with The Guardian, respectable, you know, but
there are some amazing picture editors, so I'm not...
No, totally. And I guess it's one of these things, you don't get picture editors that deal in the Middle East, let's say that.
Yeah,
that's the thing. And whereas with text, you will have editors that are Middle East experts, and he will be liaising with that editor.
Yeah.
And they will know. They probably would have lived here for a few years, and they, you know, they know the stories, they're reading the blogs.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, picture editors, I think the big problem is probably, you know, I'm a bit too young in this industry to really know, but all the cutbacks and how few people there are. So it's like 1 or 2 picture editors running a whole magazine with, like, you know, 80 images, 5 or 6 commissions to do a week. Like, how can they be expected to understand all of these stories at all the different levels? So yeah, I mean, it can be frustrating because you're there and you know, you're seeing what's in front of you and you're trying to relay it back, and they're like, no, but why don't you get this and this? And you're like, it's just not there. Like, what you're talking about doesn't exist. Or, you know, it's just like, or you've got the wrong end of the stick kind of thing. But yeah.
More questions? Great, there, thanks.
Thank you. That was really interesting, man.
No, thanks.
And I don't know if this is the right medium, but it's because maybe people are more interested in the journalistic side. But I'd be really interested to hear more about the money and how the stuff is paid for, because I work for an NGO called the Bretton Woods Project, and we're looking at the moment into massive amounts of basically Western Development Bank supported corruption. All that kind of stuff going through Mubarak clans and Sodiq that you talked about, and some of these development agencies. They're all funded by the European Investment Bank and the IFC, which is the sort of private part of the World Bank, and the sort of degree of complicity that we, you know, in the West we kind of write it all off as, oh, that's just kind of a, you know, theft by a small elite of people, and there's a certain cultural dismissiveness towards it. It's all facilitated by big Western organizations, the same organizations that are now coming in and talking about, you know, democratization and creating growth, and we're going to go save the world. So I mean, I don't know how much more you know about that, or if, you know, you were just more the imagery, but that stuff is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely contentious because, you know, like I was saying, Egypt, when it came in with this sort of big neoliberal reforms, you know, everything was subsidized, everything was owned by the state. NASA, when, you know, the sort of fall and kicked out the British in '52, just took everything and nationalized everything. So the economy was just completely stagnant. I mean, you know, I don't have that long a relationship with Egypt. I only moved there. I'd never even visited Cairo before I moved out there, you know. So, but from my understanding is, although it was sort of held up, you know, and the kind of growth was at like 8%, I think, for sort of 5 or 6 years, the real term wages and the real term sort of wealth of the everyday, you know, was decreasing because inflation was rising so much with it. So I think the way that the outside look at Egypt, you know, you put it into figures, you put it into, you know, presentations, and you take it to the IMF and you take it to the World Bank, it looks great. It looks like everybody's spending, you know, business is booming. But actually on the streets, I mean, and then that's really where I sort of, you know, it became, I mean, these people have obviously made a huge amount of money from somewhere, where exactly this money is being generated. I mean, no one knows how much Mubarak's family, managed to sort of push away before, there's like billions. I mean, the gas deals that have been done with Israel, the construction projects around kind of Hurghada and along the north coast as well. The whole thing was so sort of secretive, and unless you sort of were part of that group, I think it was very hard to get concrete facts out. But I think things have definitely, when after the revolution and files that have been found, I mean, I haven't been involved that closely since, but yeah, I think there's an agreement that they did far too much, and actually, I think the IMF would be hard to come back and say, yeah, this was a good plan. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it answers your question. But.
Any more questions? Great, thanks.
Hi, yeah, really like your work. Really moved by it. I just wanted to ask you, did you have any trouble from the authorities at all when you were taking your pictures?
There weren't any authorities.
Purely practical level.
Yeah.
And what do the subjects of your pictures think in terms of the people whose money goes into these constructions?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the next step to the publication, is to take it to Egypt. It only got printed last Wednesday or Thursday, so it's really quite new. And I've been talking to a few spaces, like cultural spaces out in Cairo, to take the publication out there. And we're probably doing that in January, because the results will be coming out from the elections that start at the end of November. And it'll be a year's, sort of anniversary for, the revolution. So we hope to do, take it out there, take a few hundred copies. It's really about money and sort of distribution, and it's something that I wanted to go into earlier. I did look for sponsorship, and I did look for people to be able to back it, to take it further abroad, and you can order it online, anybody in the world, and just pay the postage. But I think, until the publication gets back there, and this is one of the reasons we did it in Arabic, because the only places it's been published have been in English or Italian, and like how many people out in Egypt are going to be able to get access to the Guardian weekend magazine? And I know the images have got out there, and a couple have been ripped off by Mazir Yom, some of the sort of local newspapers. They've just kind of taken it from the Guardian online, and then so there's and it's being talked about that whole development is a bit more in the sort of day-to-day news sphere, but it's still very much about politics. There's a lot. They've got so much more to work through. They're not massively concerned with the developments right now, it seems, but it's sort of ongoing. But yeah, so in January we'll have a better idea of how Egyptians receive this.
So what happened with sponsorship? I mean, did you get any feedback?
I think the biggest problem actually was people just working out what it was.
And who it was for, because the whole thing a sponsor wants is to know who the audience is, I suppose.
Yeah.
And if the audience isn't quite yet known.
Yeah.
And if it's maybe students, then it's probably going to be a no.
I think it's about connection, like a lot of this industry, it's about people, so if I know somebody who works at a delivery company, their friend, and they know that my work's been going out here and here, it'd be much easier for him to appreciate, okay, wow, these are really engaged readers, if we have an advert in this or a leaflet. I mean, we were talking about lots of different ways to do it. But 5,000 copies going directly into people's hands that will read it. This isn't, just like Metro, where you're not sure where it's going to go, although it's going into a lot of hands. Yeah. So there is a sort of an area. I've started there's unabridged. You'll see in the publication.
Yeah. What
so unabridged
exactly?
is. I guess
if you Google it, it's really bad.
No, there's nothing. It's literally something that came towards the end of the publication, and me and a few other people were talking like, this is something that could maybe develop further, and we could start to curate other photographers and writers.
Self-generated work.
Yeah, other people who were collaborating, and if this model is a success, if this model's a success, if what happens to this is interesting, if it goes far and wide, if people really, I mean, I've already had 100 orders online in a week, and I mean, you never know if it's because of people following you for your work, or they want to know about Egypt, but it really depends on the story as well. But I think it's always going to be something where is engaged, where you sort of have a translation. I think that could be something that's important. So it's like this duality, and this there's two sides. But so that, you know, watch this space. Maybe Unabridged will turn into something, and there'll be another publication down the road with another photographer and writer. Maybe you'll never hear of it again.
So I really wanted to make the point that you've used the most traditional media. I don't think I actually said that in our chat. In the age of the app, etc.
Yeah.
You know, Kadir Van Loozen, to mention him again, is creating and having to learn to create an app, which he never knew before. So you've gone for the most traditional form. So do you think, when James Agee created the body of work on the tenant farmers in Hale County with Walker Evans, he said that they had to create new readers who could kind of comprehend, if you like, what they were trying to do, because he didn't write normally, and Walker Evans' photographs weren't trying to gain sort of garner sympathy as such. They were very much seeing things as they were. And I just wonder if you feel you need to engage with a new type of reader or viewer at all.
I mean,
or if you
I'd
just
like
expect
to. I mean,
people to be interested.
I'd like to. I mean, yeah, going to, say, universities, like 19-year-olds that have just started an Arabic course. I would, you know, really, and that we're doing that. You know, we're taking copies to SOAS, we'll be taking some to Oxford, and people that are, I mean, maybe they'll end up reading long-form essays anyway. Maybe they already do. I don't know. Are they a new reader, or are they not? I definitely think there's a bit of a lack of, you know, you can buy the New Yorker in England, but it's quite expensive. And it's even longer, you know, their essays can be 10,000 words.
And the LRB.
Yeah, and Harper's and things like that. So I think there are readers out there. I guess sometimes you're sort of in that space where, are you preaching to the converted? And that I kind of I've tried to question with where I've wanted to distribute it, where I would ideally like it to be distributed. I don't really want it to just circle around in photography communities. Although it's, you know, it's flattering, and I'm all up for that. In some, you know, I am. I'm giving it to Vision, and galleries across the country have asked for bundles. But at the same time, I mean, that is a cool audience as well, because people will engage with Egypt. I mean, that's essentially what it's about, and that that really is what I want it to be about. And so if someone can learn just a few things, not learn, but, you know, understand it a little bit better. I don't want to preach, but you know, it's just, well, Jack's doing the preaching. I just, you know, I take the pictures for him.
Yeah, great. Any more questions? Gentleman here, thanks.
I have a question regarding kind of the people who would actually move in there, because a part of our family's from Cairo. But I mean, I would hardly know anyone who'd actually move out there and kind of pay that kind of money to live in the desert. So I was wondering, did you have the chance to kind of meet anyone who was interested in moving there, or spoke to people who, like the prospective kind of residents?
Yeah, we went around a couple of the developments that are sort of operating, Catamere Heights. I mean, you know, I don't want to sort of talk bad about why people move there. I mean, you know, the biggest reason why, when asked why they would buy properties there, is zahma. You know, it's hectic, it's, you know, it's polluted, it's congested. This is zahma, it's crowded, and it is. I mean, I couldn't live in Cairo anymore, and so, you know, it's the fresh air, and so I think there's lots of reasons why people would move out there. The isolation. I mean, there's a part in the essay where Jack meets somebody who has started to buy up the properties in downtown Cairo in the hope that in 40 years there will be a reversal where the children of the adults that are buying the properties now will get bored of this and want to go back down to the cool old, apparently, this happened in various cities around the world, in New York and things, that everybody moves out to the suburbs and then they move back in. So, I mean, I didn't really touch on this, but Cairo is such a basket case. Cairo is impossible to work out. I mean, everything is just kind of broken and bust. And so anybody that's going to try and really do, get to grips with the sewage system, get to grips with the road system, and 8 million cars for a city that was built for like 500,000 or something. I mean, it's, so I think everybody's going. Like, everybody with money is planning on going. I mean, there might be some great buys to have in Zamalek and, where there are nice apartments now, but for the most part, like, I sort of said this, after I saw AUC, went back to Cairo, started to talk to people, I realized everybody had a connection to it. Yet nobody was really talking about it. And no one was thinking about, like, oh yeah, it might really, like, change Cairo. It might really change downtown. I mean, that was, I forgot to say, you know, I went out to AUC because my area immediately around me, I lived right next to Tahrir Square and right next to the university, and it changed overnight. When the students came back, they didn't come back, you know, they went out to this campus, and so that's what really started me to think about. It's like, wow, if you just take a whole sort of strata of society out, what happens to the rest of it? And I don't think it's been done quite maybe on this scale. I mean, there's definitely other projects around the world, developments, you know, Lahore and Luanda and Mexico City and places that I think there is similar, but I haven't visited them personally. You know, Cairo was my home, so that's what I focused on.
Thank you.
The psychiatrist said something, was a psychiatrist, said something very interesting about what happens if you do take a strata of society out, didn't they, about how it leads to a dehumanization.
Definitely, yeah.
And robotic behavior, I mean, specifically, not some kind of generalized bad stuff, but very specifically dehumanization. Anyway, are you a question? And then over to you there. Yes, thank you.
If it ever is inhabited and completed, how many people can live in these areas?
The kind of facts are slightly staggering. The plans as they stand at the moment, the people who've put in and bought land, I think it's twice the size of central Paris on either side of Cairo. And it's something, I think it's about 5 million people. Yeah, they're the figures that are being kind of thrown around. There isn't an actual master plan. I mean, that's something that's really, you know, I believe in 5-10 years, this will be not too dissimilar to how downtown Cairo is, because everything's so badly organized, everything's so badly thought through. Corruption works at every level. I mean, it won't be as congested, but I think it will be as neglected. And, you know, there just isn't like the sort of, you know, we take for granted that just rubbish gets collected. I mean, the rubbish system in Cairo, I mean, it's down to like 60% now. It's still collected informally by the Zabaleen. I mean, there are things that, you know, when you get in there and you're like, what? And these guys live off your way, you know, and yet, so it's, yeah, but at the moment, I'm rambling off, but 5 million, that's the plan. I'll shut up.
Another question here?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to ask this question. It's I'm interested in when you were doing this project, did you have in your head, did you have a target? And I'm not asking about the audience, but the target which you were attacking through doing this project, because this is a highly political project and you know about it.
I mean, I think, highly political.
I'm extremely happy to see that, because you don't have urban development background before you became a photographer, because I have, and one of the reasons, this is one of the reasons why I'm studying photography right now, because I just cannot be involved anymore in this overall going corruption in this way, and I'm actually very happy to see a project like this. I think it's an amazing work, but also, so to which extent that you were aware about the political aspects of the work you did?
It just depends how you sort of view politics. Politics is power, right? And power is money, and so the people, the way that Egypt was set up is the people in power were the people with money. So if you had money, you were in the NDP. If you were in the NDP, you had power because you had, you know, money as well. So like everything's so interconnected. Like most of the people that are developing these projects, these developments, you had to be. You wouldn't be able to get contracts. If you were, if you were an opposition party, and then there were pretty much puppet opposition parties that were around before the revolution, and you decided then to become a businessman, and and you were still affiliated with this, you wouldn't get your project agreed. You wouldn't have, the contract signed off. So I think by just looking at this space and just thinking about it, of course, yeah, definitely stepping into politics. But I mean, it's huge because these decisions come down, don't they, from the top? So this isn't like the city all gets together and goes, Cairo's really screwed up, we should all go build somewhere new. This is about more power, this is about more money, this is about, and in some ways, I kind of believe that what people not that many people were exposed to this from downtown Cairo because there's no public transport out there. But I really think it helped what they were building out there reinforce this idea of separation and this sort of divide between the rich and the poor. This was a very, very visual effect of the fact that we are literally hundreds of times richer than you. And this is like there can't be more than 2 or 3 million people in Cairo itself that, so that you're talking about 17 million other people that are just on day-to-day wages. So I think, it's instantly stepping into like politics, it's instantly stepping into who's got the power, why have these people got the power, and why is everybody else disenfranchised, why is everybody else sort of separated, why is...
Okay, but then you keep saying that you didn't have a target audience, and you basically publish it like it's going to be free, it's going to be available for anyone. So in a certain way you want to send a message, but you keep avoiding telling us why, to who, and because of what.
Well, no, I think I did try and explain myself better, that I'm always thinking editorially. I'm always thinking about I think as much as I'd like to see myself as a landscape photographer or an art photographer, it's like all very nice to think about that, but I work within the editorial market, and therefore, this is, I don't know if it comes across as news, it's current events, it's things that are going on. There are probably a lot of editors that looked at this and go, I don't think this is important. This is not what I think is important about going on in the world. And that was the case before the revolution. And, no one cared about the stories I produced. I mean, Past Perfect, the museum series, never got published. No. The first project we did with Jack never got published on the largest informal market in the Middle East and Africa. Yeah. And that was a pure result of such low wages and high inflation that everyday people were going into this market every Friday and selling their own wares to just make ends meet. Really important. There's 80 million people. Egypt's one of the most powerful countries in the Middle East. No one cared. If there was an English guy getting locked up because he'd sort of got in debt in Dubai, that would make news. But this is just a different type of platform. They're different stories, and I can see why they are avoided. But no, I am still a photojournalist, and my audience, hopefully, is kind of whoever will read it. But people that want to, they're not being force-fed Egypt for the sake of it. They're, you're not sitting watching BBC News, and it's just like something that Egypt comes up. You're actually looking for it. You want to know more about Egypt. So that's my audience.
Thank you.
Just to say thank you very much, and I enjoyed the square format of the presentation of the pictures. You touch on a concept of, in Africa, of corruption from the top down, and then you kind of mentioned you haven't been in South Africa. Have you experienced any reverse in South Africa? You have corruption from the bottom up. Have you experienced that in Cairo in any context? How
do you mean? I mean, I don't think I said just corruption from Africa, sure. But I mean, I think corruption, all powerful nations, corruption sort of. I don't know. I mean,
corruption just coming from the poor and kind of moving up into the top, the kind of reaches of that tree, which is kind of the connection of.
I mean, I sort of get what you're saying, but I think South Africa's such a big story. I've only spent 4 months there. Okay. The story I'm doing there, that I'm going to go back at the start of December, doesn't really have anything to do with that. I don't feel like I'm. I sort of see what you, but I think you're talking
in terms of Egypt. Yeah. Is there any of that? Is there any of that in that society? While it's still part of Africa, it's kind of north and south, but is there any of that kind of bottom-up corruption taking place?
I mean, I think the situation in Egypt has just gone on for like 50 years. They have this thing, bakshish, which probably a lot of people, but bakshish is a part of life there. And I don't think this is going to answer your question, but it's the way that everything is done is kind of like, I'm not really going to, like, it's so pervasive throughout society that I'm not going to do anything really until I get paid that little bit extra. So it's just like...
Is that bakshish?
Yeah, I mean, bakshish is all for all sorts of things. It's like a tip, it's like a thank you, but it can be used, but I think...
a bribe.
Yeah, no, big time, yeah. It's like, you know, the museum stuff that I was shooting, so people were paid the same wages from the 70s as caretakers in museums, and they would lock every room in the museum. So you pay to go into the museum, but we were still paying the same fee from the 70s. So we're paying 5p to get into this museum. So I don't know if this answers your question, but it's, you know, so this caretaker takes it upon himself to lock all the rooms to the doors, and then you get up there and he's like, oh, you want to see the room? Bakshish. And you're like, okay, it's a sort of weird corruption. It's, you know, the system's corrupted, but it's because they haven't been paid anything more for the last 30 years. So I never hold it. I've never, you know, it's frustrating because you're like, oh, what? Because you know, you're used to in the West, like going in somewhere and being like, I'm here. I've paid money to be here. Let me in. And so, but that's it. I mean, that's the corruption will take generations, I think, to remove. You know, from it's a really tough topic, and it's something that I think that the powers that be wanted to keep because, you know, they're like, you know, you see it every day. The policeman that hangs outside your house, or the guy that does something for you, or maybe a guy buys you a bit of hash or something like that, and they give him like 5p, 50p, a pound, and these are like multi-millionaires. But for them, they're like cool, you know. And so I think it like kept it all down. And then, you know, as soon as people lost the fear, and that's why that situation blew up as it did, and it was. Yeah, just amazing.
Thanks for that.
Hi. I'm sure my question is probably touched on in the essay in the book, but I was surprised to see that some of the pictures didn't include some of the more developed villages, like the Beverly Hills complex, and even the commercial side, like the Smart Village.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how they intend to supply water. Is it desalination or is it all from the Nile?
I think it's pretty much all from the Nile. Yeah. The desalination plants are too expensive and they need too much energy, and Egypt can't actually. I mean, the Gulf, you know, they can because they just have endless oil, but the gas, the energy that they do have, the sort of natural resources, sadly they pipe off elsewhere, which is another story altogether. But yeah, I think. No one's really thought through this, and there's a lot of academic essays out there. People are interested. It's called Cairo Cosmopolitan, and it's a fantastic book, and there's all sorts of different scenarios of where this could go, and it's all focused on these developments in Cairo, because people really aren't sure what's going to happen. And I mean, the Nile as it is, by the time it gets to Cairo, it's pretty dead, the water, like from the time it's flowed all the way up from Upper Egypt. So yeah, there's definitely a problem there. I mean, that's why Egypt's so ready to like get the arms out if Sudan starts. Yeah, so it kind of feeds in. Yeah.
Thanks. Was there another question?
Yeah. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah. Hi. Really great to see the work, and you obviously have explored this issue to a great depth. I think you've handled a lot of the questions that have been thrown at you tonight quite well. I got a couple of questions or points really, and it's really about, you've obviously been on this journey for a couple of years now, and it's not quite over yet because you're now into distribution and where it goes now, but what have you really learned about yourself and the way you work? What would you have maybe done differently, or going into your South Africa project, what have you learned that you're going to kind of go and actually start applying? And then the second part of that question really is, do you think doing self-motivated and self-funded projects like that, is the freedom a restraint, or actually if you're working on a job which has constraints, does that focus you a little bit more as well?
Okay, to the first part, that's interesting, because I didn't do photography. I was in London for 6 years, and I did bits of photography, but I did multimedia, and I was involved in teams, and I think that was something I really enjoyed about the process. Every now and then I was just like, oh, I just want to go and take photos. This is such a stress, you know, like, and because you're using people for free, you can't really push them that much. You know, if you had £1,000, it's like, actually, I want this today. And sometimes it'd be like, sorry, I've got a job on, so everything would be delayed for a couple of weeks. So that was very frustrating. So yeah, if I was to do it again, if Unabridged was to sort of do another one, I think it would be done differently, because it's not going to be my work, maybe. You know, I very doubt it's going to be my work. So I think there would have to be a different format to that. And And I think, you know, the repro guy, there's a guy in America did all the repro for it for CMYK printing. He worked for a week for free. I mean, that's not sustainable. Like, these guys, there isn't any, you know, big sort of celebrity moment. You know, it's a weird kind of not menial job. It's a very important job, but it's something in the background. And so I don't think that's, you know, I don't think I'm going to go back to Adam and say, hey, can you do this again? Yeah, but it made me realise how much I enjoy working in a team, and also just thinking things through. There's definitely a power that leaves your hands once you hand over the images to the picture editor. And I think that's the interest in a lot of photographers about doing books. So that was something that I'm very interested in pursuing more and thinking more about.
How did you? How hard did you find it to actually whittle down your images to the selected ones?
That wasn't too hard, actually. I think, yeah, good art director, and kind of just sat there, you know, 3 or 4 sessions. I feel like I know the work, you know, I'm sort of surprised when I look at it. I'm still like, okay, cool. Normally, you sort of lose interest a little bit because you've seen the work so much. But
did the words help with that as well? Just absolutely knowing what your pictures were going to be with?
I think the captions did, in terms of like, so if people just wanted to look at the pictures, what was the journey they would go through by reading the captions? And it was interesting with the Arabic where there were no words that you'd sort of, you know, I don't read Arabic, so that was interesting in the design perspective. And then having this front and back, you know, because from the Arabic you flip it over and you read right to left. So the sort of the narrative and the sort of the way the images flow
had to work both ways.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. And then, you know, you end up in the middle with this image that I think sums it up. So no, I didn't find that massively stressful. But your second question is really interesting because I am thinking about a different way to do my South Africa project, and it's something that maybe yourself will get involved, because I had this conversation. Greg was, I went to tell him about the idea and talk about distribution, and he works in lots of different areas. He said, why isn't an iPad app straight away? You know, that was his first comment, because everybody's doing that. And I don't know if I convinced you that the reasons why it wasn't, but I think maybe my next project could be, possibly. I think it's you've got to really think through, you know, where it's going and what it's doing, and
who has an iPad.
And who has an iPad? Yeah, who has an iPad? I don't have an iPad.
Thanks.
Are we okay? Do we have time for another, if there is another? One more? A final question? Oh, good. Flora.
You've mentioned you're moving to South Africa, but can I ask, I mean, you've said a bit about how crazy and busy Cairo is, but why are you leaving Egypt at this most monumental moment in its history? Is it because you don't like to be in the spotlight of news and you like to be on the edge?
I left last May, so I left, you know, 7-8 months before it all happened, and yeah, I mean, I left Cairo for pretty much my own personal reasons. I also felt that yeah, I'd explored, you know, more of Egypt than a lot of Egyptians have. I mean, I really covered it up and down, Sinai, you know, Upper Egypt, all over the place. So it was just one of those things. It's just like you kind of weigh up other things in life, and I realised that I wanted to have new experiences. And I'd met a girl, and you know, the girl didn't want to live there, although she spoke fluent Arabic. You know, it's not great for women to live in Egypt. It's not good for relationships. It's, you know, that's just an aside, but it's, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, this is your life, like, you know. Yeah, I have thought a lot about going back to. I mean, Cairo's flooded now. I mean, when I was there was probably like 10 shooters. Now it's, you know, dozens and dozens. I'll go back there for stories. I just don't want to live there. You know, you just get to a point. My Arabic never really came along either that well. And that's frustrating. And I think, you know, not being able to really hear people and understand everything that's going on around you can be very frustrating. So, yeah, I mean, South Africa, yeah, it's a long story, but you know, I was very frustrated not being there during the revolution, and not because I wanted to shoot it and I wanted to, you know, be there with all the pack of, you know, photographers and journalists. It was actually just to witness it and to see something just amazing, and you know, kind of not just historic. I mean, yeah, but I knew the country, I knew the people, you know, I knew some of the activists that were involved, and it's not your revolution, but just to have seen it would have been really, so I was sad about that. But it was, again, it allowed me to think about the way that media is received, and, you know, I knew the country, and yet this was the way I was understanding what was coming out through the channels of media and news. So that was, I had to sort of turn it into a plus point somewhere, and that was it.
Great, okay, well thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks
everybody.
for coming.